Delighted to be joined now by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, also, of course, a former Labour Health Secretary, Andy Burnham. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Well, we saw the press conference with Boris Johnson, Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance yesterday that the northwest, along with the northeast of England, Yorkshire and Humberside, are seeing very high rates of coronavirus, far, far outstripping what's going on in the rest of the country. Why do you think the virus is still spreading in your area when you've had so many extra local lockdown measures for such a long time? What is going on?
I said it to you, Julia, back at the time that the national lockdown was lifted. I came on your programme and said, this is too early for the north of England. I think it was a decision taken more with London in mind. Our cases were still quite high at that time. And I felt very uneasy about it, as did many other people here. So the national lockdown was lifted with a higher number of cases here than in other parts of the country. And for that reason, I think we've struggled to get the numbers down over the summer. But there's kind of more sort of long-term reasons, isn't there? We have a north-south divide in this country. The economy in the north is different. There's more people in low-paid work. People have struggled to afford to self-isolate. There's poor quality housing in many parts of the north. I mean, the reasons, I think, are many, if we're honest. We can't just say it's one. It's a combination of reasons, Julia. But the truth is, it's obviously a really challenging picture for us all.
Indeed. I know you've met with the Liverpool Metro Mayor, Steve Rotherham, and you've been sort of putting up a joint force against the government. Well, to appeal to the government, I suppose, is a more positive way of putting at it, saying that really you do need some more local measures to be taken into account. For instance, having more money for local authorities, more help for local businesses, particularly those affected by this 10 p.m. curfew, and indeed calling for a review of that 10 p.m. curfew on pubs, restaurants and bars, which we know is absolutely killing the hospitality trade. What do you want the government to do instead of having that 10 p.m. curfew? Do you think that's just not necessary at all? What other measures would you want, if any?
No, I don't think the 10 p.m. curfew is working because it contradicts the local restrictions. So the local restrictions that we have are all about preventing social gatherings in the home. And we've supported the government on that to get the numbers down. The trouble with the 10 p.m. curfew, in my view, is that it creates more gatherings in the home. So this is where the government's thinking is muddled, in my view. It's actually helping spread the virus, but it's also hugely damaging hospitality businesses. But you then say, well, what more do we want, Julia? And Steve Rotherham and I did come together yesterday. We've always said we're not against local restrictions, and we're always saying to the government we want to work in partnership with you. But it's difficult when restrictions are placed on our businesses without any form of proper local support. So, for instance, in Bolton, the pubs and the restaurants have been closed for about 3 to 4 weeks now. And people there who work in those pubs and those restaurants have had no local support, no local furlough scheme. And business owners haven't had proper compensation. And I would say, particularly to the Conservative Party, how can you shut businesses without compensating them or supporting the people who work in those places? And it's very worrying, Julia, if today they close or restrict businesses in Merseyside without any financial support, because in my view, if they carry on like that, the north will be levelled down this winter, and the core mission of this government, supposedly to level up the country, will be over.
What do you make of the front page of the Daily Mail today? Mr. Boom versus Mr. Doom, picture of Boris Johnson yesterday being very downbeat, and also Andy Haldane, who's the chief economist at the Bank of England, who has said that he says public concern over the pandemic and economic threats has been exaggerated. He said we had there's responsibility to avoid catastrophizing, and he said we are in a state of sort of chicken licking style economics where collective anxiety is contagious and everyone's sort of running around saying the sky is falling in when actually it's not. We actually had some very positive news in terms of virus numbers nationally from the press conference yesterday, and obviously without the 10 p.m. curfew we would have very positive news economically as well. Do you think the government is now going down the wrong road overall in terms of their handling of the pandemic and the subsequent economic costs?
Well, I don't envy the government, Julia. It's a really difficult position that they are in, and we are trying to help. But it would probably help the government if they would work more with us at a local level. Often we get decisions imposed upon us. If they'd asked me about the 10 p.m. curfew, I would have said to them that it's going to cause real problems for the police as people come out on the streets and go straight into the shops and the supermarkets. And it's probably going to make particularly younger people go straight to homes and other places to have large gatherings. So the problem has been all the way through. They've had an over-centralised approach to all of this. Test and trace is still not working in places like Greater Manchester. Let me give you one statistic. Of the contacts of people testing positive, only half are being reached by the national system. Now, that isn't good enough before the winter. So what I would say is if they'd worked more with us, we could have probably helped them more. And I would still say this to Boris Johnson today, who I do speak to. Please set up some sort of national consultative committee where we can iron out these issues together, because then there'll be more support for them when they come out into the public domain. And, as I say, it's not easy. I've tried to be constructive all the way through this.
You have been. You really have been.
Well, thank you, Julia. And I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, but I'll be honest with you. If I'm looking at a winter in the northwest at the moment, where the economic crisis, I don't believe, is fully broken, then it's going to be really tough. We've got a health crisis, an economic crisis to come. And this is where I would disagree with the Bank of England with that fairly rosy sort of picture. The furlough scheme is ending at the end of October. Industries like aviation, Manchester Airport, a massive employer here, just can't come back anytime soon. Other parts of the economy might be able to, but they can't. So what happens? What happens is a huge number of redundancies. And I think when you've got a health crisis and an economic crisis hitting the north of England like that, then I think people will feel very gloomy about the future. And it's really only the government that can step in and stop that from happening.
Andy Burnham, thank you very much for joining us, Mayor of Greater Manchester there.